Part 1. Soul. When Alice's eldest daughter hanged herself, family relations soured completely. The elderly parents had a falling out and haven't spoken since. The middle daughter Laura went to another city, ostensibly to study, but soon stopped picking up the phone and cut off all contact with her family. Rick, the younger kid, was the last to leave, packing his things while his father disappeared into the garage and his mother into the market, left his keys in the mailbox and drove off to his rental apartment. However, death didn't just touch the unfortunate family, it seemed to take up residence in their home. A couple of months later, the mother of the family went to the other world, gave her soul under the wheels of a truck. At the trial, the driver swore that the old woman ran out of the curb and froze in the middle of the road as if she wished she was dead. Soon after, her husband also went after her, gas right in the apartment. Only sheer luck allowed concerned neighbors to avoid the explosion. The body was found right in the kitchen by the stove. There was no lighter or match nearby. Surely the old man's, and he wasn't going to cook anything. He was deliberately putting his hands on himself. Anxiety settled in Rick's heart. He couldn't eat or sleep, tormented by nightmares at night and musings during the day. Lara's sister did not get in touch. No matter how many times he tried to reach her. The notary offered to write a missing persons report so that the police and then volunteers would join the search, but Yeager refused. For some reason, he was very ashamed. He was afraid that his runaway little sister would take away his apartment and blame him for the death of his parents. By the time he was in his full 30s, he hadn't made much sense of life. From an early age, Rick grew up fearful and with a vague sense that everyone around him wished him harm in one way or another. He remained silent while his parents argued with the staff of the funeral parlor when it was suddenly discovered that the dead person in the casket was missing her left arm. I didn't dare open my mouth when a similar situation happened to my own mother's body. Then it was much calmer, and it was lucidly explained to him and his father that the limb had been badly injured at the accident and may have broken off on the track. And when his deceased father lay wrapped in a shroud so that his missing ear was not visible, Yeager did not even think of telling anyone about it, only peeked under the fabric a couple times to make sure. The youngest son was left all alone, lived not far from my parents' apartment, afraid to even rent it to anyone. Life is messed up. The eerie image of a sister with her mouth sewn shut came to mind. She tried to scream, but only mooed and cried, clutching at the frightened Rick with pale hands. Once, waking up after such a nightmare at the 3rd hour of the night, he heard his phone vibrate. I didn't immediately realize that it was Lara's sister calling from an unfamiliar number. "Rick, how are you feeling?" she said, crying. "No one came to see you?" The boy shuddered and looked around, already prepared to find someone horrible near him. He swallowed and answered, "Laura, where are you?" "We're in grief here. My mom and dad died." "Do you live in their apartment?" "Rick," my sister wouldn't stop asking. "No, I can't be there. You know I'm scared of everything." "You weren't afraid to leave your parents, were you?" Laura sobbed, her voice suddenly a little rougher. "Okay, well, that's fate, then. Why is it so unfair?" "Rick, I mean, I left. I thought it wouldn't catch on." Rick's eyes brimmed with tears as well. "What are you talking about, Laura? And you don't remember?" the sister said angrily. "Alice used to tell you as a child and you cried every time." "Spoiled," Rick said in a shaky voice, and Laura hung up. The lad never got to sleep until the morning. Then a couple weeks later he found out that Laura had committed suicide. They found a note in her apartment with her brother's contacts. Rick did not go to the funeral in another city. Now everything was clearer for him. Scraps of childhood memories, deliberately tucked away in the most secret corners of the mind, floated out on the mental wind and added up to one of the worst stories Rick had ever heard. Little Alice loved scary stories, wrote them down into a thick, black-covered notebook and only took it out at their secret meetings. The 3 children would gather in a dark closet if they were in the city, or in a gazebo near the vegetable garden if in the country. They lit their father's flashlight and started telling stories. Rick didn't know where the older Alice got the horror from, but he remembered exactly the unfortunate evening when he first heard a tale of the spoiled. It means cut or mangled. Laura explained to him, as if he'd been stabbed or stabbed many times. Her look became intimidating, and little Rick froze. He's called that because no one knows his real name. The older sister spoke quietly, shining a flashlight on her face, and the nickname came about because of the victims. After meeting him, they all lay mutilated. It is not known where the mangled one comes from. An old experience which once told me that he appears from the black core, where evil dwells. And at first he flies and in spirit form, very weak but terribly evil. He takes up residence in the home of some large family and begins to take their souls to feed on their power. He can move into our family, too, Laura said, smirking wryly. Of course, Alice indulged her, but he's not taking all of them, only 4. Probably the very first one he takes the trog. Laura giggled. Alice glanced at a stiffened Rick and, pausing, calmed down. No, and it will never settle in our family, but it might in others. First it will drive a man insane, freeze his soul in some body part and then make him kill himself, drink poison or jump out a window, and after he dies he will eat that body part and become a little bit stronger. And when will all 4 of them be taken away? Little Rick asked timidly. Alice spoke in a whisper. Then he'll take a needle with endless black thread and go looking for new people to tear a piece off and sew back on. Laura shrieked and shoved Rick in the shoulder. He winced and tore into his parents' room. The girls were unaware that they were beckoning the spoiled one into their family, saying his creepy, time after time, a nickname, and none of them could have imagined that after many years, an ancient monster would make its way out from the black core and go on a quest. Part 2. Shell. Amelia and Katrin were returning from the mall after sunset. It was a chilly evening. There were very few people on the street. Everyone hid in their warm apartments and stayed away from the street. The light bulb on the pole near the arch had been broken again, and between the 2 lanterns, a dark spot 50 meters in size was formed. The girls walked slowly, illuminating themselves with flashlights on their phones, talking about their own things, trying not to think about the bad. But in the archway, they both felt someone's presence. Amelia was the first to startle and turn around. Her flashlight pulled her out of the darkness. A hunched-over kid. He wore a tattered jacket with a white shirt and dusty pants. Standing barefoot on the cold concrete, he leaned tiredly against the wall of the archway. Amelia gasped and backed up, inadvertently pushing Katrin. She sprained her foot and broke her heel on the boots, flopped down on her own bags. The boy slowly turned his head, and his well-styled hair distracted attention from the strange face with no eyebrows and huge eyes without eyelids. Katrin, who had fallen, noticed the frenzied look and screamed, and the boy blurted out in a hideous. He smiled and in one leap he sharply toppled Amelia, who was standing there. Both friends were pinned against the concrete, with strong hands under the deadly fingers. The tracheas quickly snapped, and Amelia and Katrin, wheezing, dying, and the boy stood up, took out a skein of black thread from his inner jacket pocket, and a shiny needle in the light of the flashlight on the phone, which lay motionless and broken. With the screen down, the monster picked out the right parts. He took Amelia's eyes, breathed on them, filled them with otherworldly essence for strength, and sewed them to his earlobes. Like earrings, he took Katrin's lips from her and fitted them in place of her missing eyebrows in an unpretentious way. Part 3. Stitches. Harry noticed a dark silhouette at a closed stall in the neighborhood. Somewhat first, he peered timidly around the corner, then stepped out and stood at the counter. Harry shivered, threw away his cigarette, and went back to his workplace, his 24-hour observation room. Locked the door right away. Sensing something wrong, I turned to the cash register and shuddered, swearing loudly. From behind the window, he was being stared at by some asshole in a creepy mask. Moron, Harry concluded, but he quickly came to his senses. I'm sorry, I was just scared. What do you want? But the man outside the window was silent. Out of embarrassment, Harry smiled and interjected a little louder. Hello, what did you want? Order up. And as he spoke, walked slowly to the other corner of the kiosk. He was working inside. He wanted to see if that silhouette was standing at the neighboring stall. Will you be ordering? He said a little more quietly, and happened to catch a glimpse of a very natural-looking, a human eye on the customer's ear. Suddenly the strange customer sharply thrust his pale hands through the window, grabbed the plastic frame and, pushing off with his feet from the outside, jumped inside the stall and deftly landed on dirty, bare feet. Harry didn't even have time to open his mouth before the monster pounced on him. It knocked the frightened boy to the greasy floor. From the top of the counter came sliding down empty paper cups and sauce packets. Harry tried to fight back and elbowed the monster in the face of a stinking face. It was then that he saw the black threads that held the stitch together, the bulb with human lips. The sloppy but sturdy stitches were intimidating in their grim appearance. Harry screamed and started punching his attacker. He hit as hard as his awkward position allowed, in the small, unattractive nose, in the wide jaw, in the temples, even in the open, frantic eyes. But the monster didn't care. With a viciousness it dug with strong fingers into the victim's long hair, and in 3 powerful strokes, killed Harry. And all this in silence, without making a sound. When Harry stopped twitching and the soul left his dead body, the monster ripped off a long flap, bloody skin and the victim's right arm, and then jumped out through the window and disappeared in the darkness behind the stalls. There he took off his jacket and shirt and sewed the torn leather on his shoulder in the manner of an axle belt, and attached an arm to his right breast. The power flowed from the body to the new limb, and soon it was. The monster could move a 3rd arm. There was a loud squawk from nearby. The monster turned around at the sound and quickly caught sight of a silhouette on one of the balconies of a 5-story building. A 40-year-old laborer. Alex went out for a smoke, shivering from the draft. He threw out the first bullock and immediately went for a second cigarette. He had noticed the strange man a few minutes ago. He was still rummaging through darkness behind the market, and Alex figured it was a homeless man preparing a place to sleep. But all the guesses gone to hell when this something ran out into the light, jumped on the yellow gas pipe, and quickly, climbing up to the 4th floor with 3 hands, Alex slammed the window in terror and ran into the apartment. The fright made me feel sick, dizzy, and my whole body covered with prickly goosebumps. "Sandy," he tried to shout to his wife, but he couldn't get it out of him. Nothing but a hoarse whisper. My chest squeezed and a strange pain echoed in my left shoulder. Above his head, a gray fist shattered the double pane of glass in a dribble. A monstrous hand descended toward Alex, grabbed him firmly by the neck and pulled him back to the balcony with one tug, sharp, that the blade splintered deeply into his back and side, drawing long, bloody streaks across his skin. Alex howled in pain, whispering pleas for mercy, but the monster wasn't listening. He jumped onto the windowsill and flew down from the 4th floor with the dying Stoss into the garden. There he made himself comfortable and ran with it away from the house. A needle gleamed in his new chest, protruding hand. Alex had one last horror and died with his eyes closed. The spoiled one liked his prey very much. From a fresh scraps he sewed a semblance of a new body, the sack over the old one he stuffed under the skin fat, Alex's internal organs and his blood, leaving the dead man with only a broken skeleton and an intact head. The monster had grown noticeably larger. The old stitches were gone and the nightmarish black threads returned to the real. However, the 2-meter monster did not lose speed. On the contrary, his engorged body gave him strength and stamina for the hunt. It was to look for more of the unfortunates. For a short time, nearby, 3 people were walking down the street. Jacob, Emma, and Michael had spent the whole day studying for their term papers, and it wasn't until nightfall that we were free and decided to go for a walk without emptying our phones. "So worried about this studying thing, guys," Emma complained. "It's like there are no other problems." "Please," Jacob grumbled. "Imagine, no time to even go to the doctor. Again, I got a rash all over, even though I didn't do anything like that." "Oh, come on," Michael couldn't stand it. To listen to the silence. "Fart all day long, we'll all write it up and defend it. Calm down, let's just." He didn't have time to finish. A huge creature burst out of the darkness, and with a single medium-sized blow, blew away Michael's head. It rolled down the street like a ball. Emma pulled away. Jacob grabbed her arm and dragged him behind him toward the houses. "Don't look over there," loudly he basked. but his voice trailed off. Spoiled didn't even pay attention to the fugitives and calmly regarded the new body. Noticing the beautiful tattoo on his victim's brush, he breathed more frequently, and the corners of his ugly native lips twitched slightly. The monster ripped the jacket on the decapitated corpse and with joy and delight discovered that the wonderful tattoo was part of a whole battered sleeve, and it stretched all the way down to the shoulder. Happily, the spoiled one had no limit, and for the first time since his appearance he made a low moan, gently separating his arm from Michael's torso. He pulled from the skin fold on the back of a needle and thread. Without hesitation, he attached the charming limb with the pattern to the right side of the shoulder to make it easier to admire the composition. To gain more strength, he cut his forearms open and stuffed it with randomly torn off parts of Michael's body. The black threads tied it together nicely. A rupture, and immediately the attached arm poured with power. Immediately, the monster remembered the escaped boys with the girl and chased after them. "Come on, hurry up," Jacob, who was out of breath, said, dragging Emma into the open entryway. "Do you know someone you know? Is there someone I can go to? You hear that?" But Emma could not answer. Her breath hitched and terror gagged her, and she couldn't speak. So Jacob started knocking and ringing all the doors on the first floor. "Help! Fire!" shouted, just like we learned in school. But no one opened the door. There was someone behind one of the doors, cursing, called Jacob a junkie and told him to leave. "Call the police," he said. "Behind us, there's a creature running," and all he got in response was an eerie silence. Emma sobbed and burst into loud tears. Clutching his head, Jacob's legs immediately gave out, and he leaned against the wall, slumped on the floor. "What was that, Emma?" he wheezed, staring at his own trembling hands. Did you see that? It blew Michael's head off." "Mommy, is there such a thing?" Emma cried even harder. She was shaking all over. "What idiots we are," Jacob wailed. "We listened to him and didn't take the phones. Where should we go now?" "What if it's looking for us?" "Shut up," Emma squealed. "I'm going to die now. My heart hurts. I'm sorry. Please." Jacob was frightened. "Now, wait a second. I'll go up to the second one and knock some more." There was a footstep outside the front door. Emma bit her lip, bloody, and rushed over to Jacob. And he froze in horror and couldn't even say anything. With the beeping of the chymophone, the iron door opened. In the doorway stood a stout man with an empty bucket. "What are you doing here?" he harumphed. "Close it," Emma begged, going hysterical again. "I'll close it for you, you sheep," he said angrily, and propped the door open with a shard of brick. "I'll close it for both of you. You've lost your fucking minds." "A junkie," a shadow flashed behind him. Emma let out a loud gasp and rolled back to the mailboxes. Jacob never moved. Spoiled, sprawled out even more, took in the stout man's heart on for his rival and slammed him mercilessly into the wall. The plaster fell from the impact, and the mutilated body. Jacob jerked as he regained consciousness, but it was too late. Jacob jerked, coming to his senses, but it was already too late. Spoiled killed him with one whiplash. Emma covered her mouth and moved slowly toward the elevator, not daring to take the stairs. Cockpit descended for a mockingly long time, and the girl was very much afraid of not having time to run in. The doors opened. Emma slid inside and pressed the button for the last floor. As the elevator drove away, the girl, confused about what she wanted to do next. She wanted to hit the stop and sit in the dark, a cabin somewhere between the floors, but she quickly dismissed the idea, fearing that she would drive herself into a trapped, and if the creatures think to open the doors, there'll be nowhere to run. When at last the cab came to a stop, Emma got on the ninth and rushed to the first door on the left. I jammed the bell button with a shaky finger and listened to the sounds in the entryway. From downstairs, every once in a while came a disgusting chugging sound. "Who's there?" muffled asked from behind the door. Emma shuddered with surprise and almost shrieked, a little more quietly. Approaching the keyhole, she said, "I beg you very much. Open up. It's in the entryway." She faltered and whispered uncertainly, "A maniac. He's on the first one. Now, looking for me. Help. I beg you." The door was ajar. Emma tugged on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was in the way. An old-fashioned chain. The iron railing trembled frighteningly. The ringing echoed through the dark entryway. And the motion sensors downstairs clicked on. The lights on the floors came on. The monster rushed, rushing higher and higher. "Who are you?" the guy from the apartment asked. "Please," Emma whimpered, grabbing the chain. "It's big, in stitches, in strings, spoiled." The boy was frightened. "I can't open it. He'll take it anyway," he whimpered and slammed the door shut sharply. Emma shivered to the very marrow of her bones. She rushed out of the lift, pushed the call button, and scrambled inside before, as the monster raced to the 9th floor. The girl gained a few seconds. The cab was carrying, and Emma wondered which way to run away. The steps flashed before her eyes. Then out of the driveway, the paving stones of the small public garden, outside the house, the garages, the barn. Emma mentally and prayed to fate to give her the strength not to suffocate and escape. The elevator stopped. Emma got ready. The doors opened. The girl sped out and went straight into the hands of the beast. It came down, faster. Emma shook. A death scream ripped from her throat. Spoiled. Found a new pair. Feet. Theo snorted and snapped the girl's neck. Spoiled suddenly felt something truly strange. Exactly. A piece of his own soul was hovering somewhere nearby. And in the same house, on the 9th floor, sat shivering with his back pressed against the front door of the last survivor of that first family. Rick's youngest son. He whipped and slapped himself and cried and howled, cursing himself for his cowardice, but he still couldn't fully believe what he was seeing. He saw the monster through the peephole. As the doomed Emma slid into the elevator, the landing, came running and sprawled out. Rick had imagined him not to be so huge and was scared out of his wits. That view. Then the monster tore down, and the boy turned away and sat on the floor. He knew that he couldn't help the unfortunate girl. Otherwise, the monster would have killed them both. But Rick still wouldn't stop. A longing flickered in my soul, and a heavy sense of guilt pressed down on my heart. As a child, Alias was never told how one could defeat this spoiled one, and her favorite scary book was long since scrapped. Rick, however, is a saint. He believed he could do without it. Part 4. Synthesis. If the souls of the family are in it, and if it was 4, he wouldn't take another one, Rick reasoned, pulling out his father's closet. The hunting knife he took for himself after the funeral, and if he did, it would burst by wiping it off. Tears rolled. He threw the leather case to the floor, examined the shining blade, and with a firm, he took a step toward the door. Fear tormented him, chained him, tossed the most hideous and frightening imagery, only to have the eternally fearful Rick accept his cowardly and didn't dare step foot out the door. But the boy had already made up his mind. But one look at the monsters was enough to render all the horror of 30 years of living powerless. Spoiled was still down there, filled with dead Emma. I felt a pleasant tingle all over me. A huge and unformed body, and the closer Rick got, the harder she stopped. There was one flight of stairs left before the monster met him. The boy saw a giant shadow on the wall and gripped the knife tighter. One precise blow would be enough, he decided firmly. I'm the only one who can kill him and no one else. But Rick wasn't ready to see the spoiled one more time. Those 4 legs and arms sticking out of a swollen 3-meter torso, head in folds of skin, and long hair sewn back in a rush of languid anticipation. A little more, and the creature wouldn't have fit in. On the floor, Rick marked a vulnerable spot on her heaving body and began to approach slowly from the side, quietly shuffling his feet. He had only a miserable couple of meters to go when the scarred. He turned abruptly and smiled. His eyes sparkled with unconcealed joy. He breathed loudly, his mouth slightly open. The monster's face was glowing with happiness, and that look would drive any man crazy. Rick stared stunned, staring at the scarred man, and suddenly realized everything. There was no release from the clinging bonds of innate fear. Just as there was no chance of defeating the monster, all these feelings turned out to be a kind of bait, and they served not the brave hunter, but only the monster. The scarred man stretched out all 4 arms, gently picked Rick up and held him close. The black knee and needle popped out by themselves and, holding in the air, started sewing the guy's body right onto the monster. Finger by finger, fold after fold, they did not miss a centimeter, doing the work meticulously and qualitatively. Igor wasn't scared. He didn't feel any pain either. When there was no more thread left, the needle pricked the boy in the back of his head, and Igor felt all his insides swim quite painlessly into a monster, and soon he himself dissolved. His thoughts became confused, and everything disappeared. Spoiled breathed a sigh of relief. He felt wonderful. Rick's soul filled that void, which it desperately tried to cover with dead body parts. The monster stood as he on the day of his death. Appearances: thin and hunched over, only quite leggy, with no clothes on. However, he had no need now of other people to gain strength. His whole body was infused with killing power, and his soul was aflame. A fierce hatred. He went out into the street as strong as he had ever been. The sun was already rising over the city, and the monster was walking and figuring out where he should start.